as best as I can to paint the picture of sociocracy. So in a nutshell, it's working and organising together to get things done without trampling on people. I guess we've all had experiences of the need to get things done and the structures and processes we have to get those things done, leaving some people feeling like they got what they wanted, other people feeling like they weren't heard. There's a big failure rate in community-led groups, in part because the working together is so hard. So I feel like we've got so far as a group and have stayed so together because we've tried to consider not trampling on people from the beginning. It tries to effectively combine people with process, so you can't just have people without process and you can't just have process without people. It's about finding a balance that's workable. Don't know why that's doing that. And it could be seen as humanising efficiency, which I think is quite a nice way of putting it. Because it's about being efficient, it's not like just being all fluffy and getting on with each other and hugging. It's about getting things done, but in a way that's respectful and harmonious. Some people consider it democracy realised. I don't quite know if we have got to that point yet, but it's much more along that way than, say, organisations we've been involved with before or ways of working. So in terms of structure, we're quite, I'm sure most of us used to a hierarchical structure that's very autocratic, where the power is top down and the power only goes one way. So if you're down here, you don't have much capacity or influence. You only get told what to do, and they only get told what to do, and they pass it. Like it's meant to be very good for getting things done, and it seems to get things done because that's the structure that a lot of organisations and businesses and groups utilise. But it's prone to trampling on people. It's prone to those on the lower rungs of that organisation not feeling like they have a voice, not feeling like they have any power, not feeling respected. So it gets things done, but there are costs to that. And the other end of the spectrum is sort of a democratic flat structure where everyone is absolutely equal and everyone has a say and everyone has to agree everything and there's no leader, and often that's based on consensus, so we all have to agree, and that, whilst it is very respectful of people, it actually can be very hard to get anything done or agree on anything, and some of you might have experience of that. So sociocracy pitches itself somewhere in between. The root of the word is socios, and it's about balancing efficiency with equality. I guess that's the heart of sociocracy, is trying to balance efficiency and equality. It has a very inclusive spirit, and that's sort of a principle really. You know, it's about trying to include people, how best to include people. It values the wisdom of the group. So it's not saying one person can know more than everyone else, and something of our exercise later will give a demonstration of the power really of that, of if you're utilising everyone's perspective, everyone's thoughts, and there's a real value in hearing things that even if you thought you had it sorted, someone can throw up something else that really you would never have thought about, and there's a real power in that. So trying to include people as much as possible, so the group is wiser than the individual, and space for the breadth of a person to contribute. So as we were saying, in sort of relation with non-violent communication, it's not just about what you can contribute as an idea or as a logical point. There's space for being a human as well, and just to have a response that's just like, ugh, I don't like that, or I'm excited. You know, it tries to, as we'll see in the round section, it tries to give space for allowing a bigger breadth of who we are as people. And so our meetings, I feel like I've never been in meetings like them in any organisation. You know, there's a warmth, there's tears, there's less facade, I would say. and Sociocracy really helps make space for that. And it tries to see objections as valuable and useful. So it might be a no, but it might be a really helpful no. There might be some real interesting points in there from something you hadn't considered. So it's trying to see the value really of objecting and learning from that and finding the wisdom and the nugget in that. I think that's something we could be better at. It's also an iterative process, which means it's sort of endlessly ongoing, so there's a back and forth. It's not like start off fixed and go forward from there, so it really is an ever evolving process, a way of organising. So you try things out for a while and you see, that's one of the principles. Rather than getting it perfect to begin with and then sticking to it, it's working something out for a fixed time where you'll review it and go. So there's always a commitment to movement forward and improving it as you go, rather than getting it perfect and sticking to it. They have a sort of a triangle really: lead, do, measure. Sometimes they phrase it differently, but that's the sort of the 3 steps really. You lead something, as in you decide what you're going to do, you do it, and then you measure it and collect feedback, and then you go around again based on that feedback. So it's ever evolving. It also encourages learning from experience, which is nice because we're never going to know it all, and each experience can offer something. And it's, I guess the suck it and see is part of that. And it allows for continual adjustment. So flexibility in life, I would say, and in working together really helps make for a more robust grouping or organisation. So if you're continually able to adjust, you're able to navigate more things. So consent aims dynamism. So decisions are made by consent rather than consensus, which is, they sound very similar, but they're actually quite different. Consent means, can I live with this for a while? And consensus is, do I agree to this? Do I agree that this is right? So we're not looking for right, we're looking for right enough for now, and then we'll reconsider it. So it's easier to get on board with a plan if it's, can I live with this for now? Or can I live with this for a short time and see how it goes? That's more accessible than, I agree to this is the right way to do it. So if you see, it's a lower threshold of, what's the word?
Agreement.
Yeah, lower threshold of agreement. So that's what we use, consent rather than consensus. So, that's very, very quick as a background, but are there any questions that people have?
The ongoing process, when you say you're going to try something out for a while, and in that triangle it says lead, who leads?
It depends. I guess the lead element of that is the process by which you decide what you're going to do. So that might be the group. The group might decide that it will be an individual. So whilst the Sociocracy tends to want to include, with its inclusive spirit, as many people as possible, sometimes it decides that it allows you to decide that one person can go off and lead on their own and come back. But our experience is that when one person is tasked with doing something and they come back having done all this work, they get to hear all the things they didn't think about, and it's disheartening for the person that went off to do the work, and it's frustrating for the people who didn't get a chance to input into it.
I see. There's various ways of talking about that, and I'm going to go into it in a bit more detail, but another way is, instead of lead, do, measure, is plan, carry out and evaluate. So the lead is the plan rather than an individual leading it. But it's the preparation for the work you're going to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the newer formatting of the words, isn't it? It's much
Yeah.
nicer.
Yeah.
What if someone doesn't consent?
I think that's our next
Okay.
presentation. Want to just respond now?
There's various things you can do, but you would first of all try and find why they don't consent, and then it would depend really whether their objection is to do with meeting the circle's aims or a personal preference. And in general, in sociocracy, an objection is valid if it prevents the circle doing the work that it's got to do. But if it's just someone who has a personal preference which is not really related to the work of the circle, that wouldn't necessarily be accepted as an objection unless it was something that really prevented them working. Like if you try to make sandwiches in a bakery and somebody's got an allergy to peanuts, they can't make peanut butter sandwiches, that's a genuine objection. But if they want they don't want the buildings built with blue paint, they want pink paint, that may not be a valid objection, but it may be accommodated.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I would say that there's because of how it's structured, and because it is trying to be inclusive in the process of building up to a proposal, it reduces the objections because things have been considered, people's views have been taken into account in the lead up to creating some sort of plan. So I think that in itself reduces the amount of objections. And also, because you're only committing to doing something or you're trying something for a defined amount of time, and it's not fixed and it's iterative and there's a chance to see how that goes, that objection might be not strong enough that it means you couldn't live with it for now. But we'll get into that a bit later.
I'm wondering about the role of the individual in sociocracy, because often it brings up lots of challenges for an individual. So how do you how does sociocracy say that should be dealt with? Do people go away and do their own work and come back, or is that within the group? So uncomfortable feelings, anger, all that kind of stuff.
I think sociocracy, by the nature of it, allows for, like I said, bringing a bit more of your humanity and a breadth of who you are to the process. We're going to talk about, for example, a round of initial reactions or gut reactions, or so there are little things built in. And I guess different groups will use sociocracy differently. And for our group, process and individual well-being and working harmoniously is really important to our group. So we semi-regularly stop all getting work done to give space for what's going on interpersonally or what's going on for an individual.
Thanks.
Okay, are we all right to move on to the next press?
Consent. Just a quick word about this way of making policy decisions. Sociocracy recognises two kinds of decisions or arenas, really. One is policy and one is operations. Policy is the pattern or template for future decisions, and an operational decision would be like how you carry out that template. I mean, for example, if we had a policy about buying goods for the houses that might say we get the best value we can, but we want things to be as environmentally as friendly as possible, and if possible we want to get things from a co-op, say, might be our general policy. So I'm charged with going out and buying toilet rolls and I reckon I could go to Infinity Foods, or I could go to the co-op, say, and I could make that choice. So the policy decision in general is made by a circle, by agreement, by consent. But you may well give an individual or a group, a subgroup, autonomy to go out and carry out that policy the best way they think is right. And there'll always be ways of like reviewing that, and if nobody likes it, you have to change the policy. But that's a simple example.
Just kind of feed into that. So remember we said at one end of the spectrum is autocratic hierarchies, at the other end of the spectrum are flat circles or flat structures, and sociocracy is kind of in the middle. There is a hierarchy, but it's a hierarchy of perspective. So those in a higher place have a higher perspective, so that would be more policy related. Because your overview is the general direction, and people in lower circles would have a more detail focused perspective. And we'll go into why that's not traditional hierarchy as well in other ways later. But
you're going to talk about circles in a bit, aren't you? Is that a question, Simon?
No, it's actually a therapeutic head scratch. So do carry on.
In its very basic way, consent is given when nobody objects to a proposal. So we'll have a proposal like, we will buy our materials at the best possible price, as environmentally friendly as possible, and from a co-op if possible. And that's so if I'm going to get consent, I'll do a round. So I've proposed that, and I'd just like a quick question: has anybody got an objection to that policy?
No.
No? No?
It's an easy one to know. No objection.
No.
Okay. So we've got consent. Nobody's objected to that policy. There's a formal way of objecting, which is I have no paramount and arguable objection to the policy. But the informal way is to smile, nod your head, say that's okay. The important thing is that whoever's facilitating the proposal hears or gets the nod from everybody, and that is a way of being inclusive as possible. I talked a bit about preference earlier. I'd just like to expand on that a bit. Everybody has a preference, and then we'll have a bigger range that we can tolerate, and then the rest we would object to. Everybody's got different areas, so if you overlaid people's preferences and tolerances, you get quite a spread. Not everybody's tolerance is the same, not everybody's preference is the same. So you end up with a shared preference which is quite small, and a shared tolerance which is quite big. And this is related to the difference between consent and consensus. I have to be careful because consensus means different things to different people, and you can do consensus in a formal way which is very much like consent and just as effective and efficient. But often people's understanding of consensus is that you keep talking until everybody likes what you've decided, and then we're all happy, but if you don't, you can't decide. And that's really a crude way of putting it, but I mean, there is that spectrum between a formalised way of reaching consent or consensus and that very informal, let's talk about it until we're fed up and we can't be bothered anymore. So that is, in sociocracy, what you're looking for is a shared tolerance, that this decision is okay for now. It may not be, you know, I probably would have preferred to go to Infinity Foods because I like them, but it's okay that Julian bought them from the co-op, it's within our policy, I can tolerate that. So giving consent means I can work with this personally, that there isn't anything that prevents me working, and it won't prevent us carrying out the aims of our circle, whether that's the bigger circle, the general circle that oversees the co-housing project, say, or whether it's the purchases circle that's doing the shopping for the community. Whichever circle it is has aims, and the policy shouldn't contradict those aims. If you find it, you can't avoid it, you might have to change your aims, but
And just to say, the term circle is the term associated for a team. And we'll talk about why it's called circle and that later.
so any proposal should be formed in a way that can be assessed. It can be measured, or you can tell if you've achieved the aim. You know, what's the acronym SMART? Yeah, that's very common, and this is no different. I mean, sociocracy uses all the same tools that other people use. It just puts them together in a particular way. So, ideally, a proposal should have a way to measure a progress or outcome, and have a date for review. So that enables you to say the decision is safe enough to try, I'm okay with it, it's good enough for now, but I know it can be reviewed at a future date, and that makes it easier to reach consent, rather than feeling that you're going to be stuck with this forever and you may not be totally comfortable with it, or you may not be sure that it's going to work, but you know that we're going to see how it goes, try it out, and review it in a month's time, a year's time, or whatever. It's another way of saying learning by experience.
So Julian, does that relates to policy decisions rather than doing projects?
Well, it can relate to either. The principle of sociocracy is that consent is used for policy because that affects so many future decisions, and you need to be able to share that and have consent from everybody. You can make operational decisions by consent as well, and if you have a small team going off to set up a conference, say, you might well do that. But with operational decisions, you can decide by consent how you make those decisions. So you could have a team that has a leader, and you could say in that team, that leader can tell everybody what to do. As long as everybody consents to that, that's okay, and it might be the most efficient way of doing it.
Yeah.
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 Just touch on rounds a bit more. It's used a lot in sociocracy, and the important thing is that everybody's heard. That is a basic value of sociocracy, is that everybody is equivalent. You may not all have the same role, you may not all have the same powers actually. As I just said, you might have a leader in a circle and other people who are doing what they're told, but the important thing is that when it comes to consent in policy decisions or operational decisions, if that's the way you're making it, everybody is heard. And it's important not just for equality, and equivalence is a word that's used in sociocracy, but it's having trust in the group mind that may not be that one or two people see all the problems. It may be that other people have got an experience that would be really useful to setting this policy, and it's giving everybody an opportunity. And it's also a way of giving everybody a space. It's very easy in groups, particularly big groups, but it also can be in small groups, that people feel a bit nervous about saying something and they're easily overridden by somebody who's more confident or louder or gets in quicker. And the rounds give you an opportunity. I mean, there are informal ways of doing it, like just looking around the room as a facilitator. Or you could have a talking stick if things get really heated. But the important thing is to give everybody a go. Oops. And as Rich mentioned, there are different types of rounds depending on your situation, and I'll just touch on them here because we don't have a lot of detail. We might go into them a bit more when we come to talk about meetings later on. So a check-in at the beginning of a meeting is a way of bringing people into the meeting and allowing people just to say how they feel, get it out on the table, and we find it really helps. I've often gone to meetings where you kind of launch into the business and you're still back there really, you're not in the room and you're not feeling engaged. A round allows you to say how you feel so that people know, so that you've expressed it, and it kind of breaks the ice a bit as well. Clarifying questions round. Whenever a proposal is made, if you're following Sociocracy to the letter, you'd have a clarifying round, questions round, which at its simplest is saying, do you understand what this proposal is? So my proposal that we buy materials for best value, environmentally friendly and from a co-op if possible, do you understand that? It might be something much more complex, or it might be using jargon, or it might make assumptions about what people know. So a clarifying questions round is important to give people the opportunity to just understand what's being proposed. You can have, you go on after that to have a quick reaction round. So that's when people can say, oh, I really don't like this. Or have you thought about this, that and the other? Again, one by one, people can give their reactions, and it can be a gut reaction or it can be your ideas about whether this would work or not. It's a second stage of, well, it's the first stage reaction to the proposal really. And again, it should be quite quick. You don't want to dwell too long on things. It's just giving people that chance to respond. I mean, often when a proposal's put, people are kind of trying to say something, or I've got a better idea. So you get that out in the room, and if people are coming up with ideas, you note them and take notice of them, and maybe incorporate it into a revised proposal.
Do you need 5 minutes? Just as a time check.
Okay. Consent. The next round is checking for consent. You've given the proposal, people understand it, you've heard people's reactions, and then you ask one by one, do you consent to this? If people object or have a concern about it, then there are other things that you need to do. The proposal may not go through as it is, and there's various ways of dealing with objections which I'll talk about a bit later on. But usually what it ends up with is the proposal being modified. It may be abandoned, but it's usually modified either in the meeting or outside the meeting and brought back again. And then nomination is to do with choosing people for roles. There's a special process that Sociocracy uses for electing people to roles, like who's going to be the treasurer for the next 6 months, who's going to facilitate this meeting, that sort of thing. We haven't really got time to go into depth in this short workshop, but I'd encourage you to look online about how that goes.
There's a handout actually on the election process, which is really fun and a really nice way of electing people. It's a shame we can't do it here, but it is all outlined and why we use that in one of your handouts later on today.
It's a positive experience and quite fun. And closing or evaluation is at the end of a meeting, is just quickly find out, hey, what people thought went well and what people, if anybody's got any constructive suggestions of how to do things better in the future. And that is part of this lead, do, measure feedback group. The closing evaluation round is kind of the measuring of the meeting. How well did it go? I'll talk a bit more about evaluation later.
So we're going to look at circles, which I mentioned earlier, were it's the term in Sociocracy for a team or a group within the structure. So, for example, at Sussex Co-housing, we have a general circle, which is more of the policy-related perspective, and then we have task circles, which are site design, community, and legal and finance. So they're other circles that are working on specific things on a more operational level. So reminder of where we are. We're not strictly hierarchical, or we're hierarchical but of perspective rather than power. And we're not flat, we're in the middle. And we've touched a bit earlier on policy and operations. And what we haven't really talked about at the moment or so far is the thing of starting from vision. So we did a big visioning project in Sociocracy Co-housing. We created a vision and a mission, so the mission of what we're going to do to achieve our vision. And then from that, we deduce some aims, so what we're going to have to do to deliver the mission, to help create the vision. And policies, as Julian sort of mentioned, they're like templates, they're guides and templates that allow you to stay on track. They're like bumpers on the 10-pin bowling, so the ball eventually gets to where it wants to go and your aims are achieved. And the operational tasks that you do sit within the policies, which sit within the aims, which sit within the vision. So ideally there's an alignment of the bigger picture, the bigger perspective and the detail. Policy guides, it provides boundaries and it encapsulates principles, and operations is doing the work. Guides the day-to-day doing and ensures decisions and work meets the vision and the aims. So we're used to that hierarchy, and this is an idea of a sociocratic hierarchy. As I mentioned, at present, Sussex Co-housing has a general circle, which was the first circle we had, which had everyone that was involved. And then how long ago? 2 years ago?
Yeah.
2 years ago-ish, we created 3 task circles: site and design, legal and finance, and community. And as you'll notice, some members of the general circle are also members of the task circle. Some are just in the task circle. Another layer of structure that we don't have which would be the equivalent of a board of directors in an organisation, is what is called a top circle. And I should say that the terminology for this changes depending on who you're talking to. The design of it, the labels for it are different depending on whose image you've ripped off the internet. But the structure basically is this. So we use different terminology, but this was the best visual illustration that we could find. So, for example, a top circle, if the general circle is overseeing the work of the project, a top circle would likely include experts in the field that would help have an oversight of the vision of your project. So the highest level perspective would be responsible for the top circle. So
Sociocracy for All are now calling it the mission circle.
the mission circle.
Because
So
it's like holding the project on course from its legal aspects in particular.
So you might have, a legal and finance expert, people that aren't living in the community, but they have an expertise, and they'll be able to ensure that you're living up to your highest mission. And then the general circle is almost like a management team in a traditional hierarchy. Oh, go on.
Okay, so you partly answered the first question. Yeah, general circle might include a project manager.
Well, I guess it's a group management. I guess it's using
Right.
that, unless the group
Yeah.
decides that they want a
It's
single
not
project
that.
manager.
But it might be that the top circle and the mission circle appoints a project manager to oversee or lead, not lead in the sense of tell everybody what to do, but to kind of coordinate the general circles.
Yeah. And what about people who are interested? Maybe they're not members, but they're supporters. So that you've got at least a couple of hundred supporters, don't you?
So we've got about 450 people signed up as interested in the project on the mailing list.
Yeah.
We have, I think, current count 14 registered supporters, and we have 9 development team members. So the development team members are actively involved in these circles. Some are in the general circle and the task circle. Some are only in task circles, and we're just trying to get clear on bringing supporters involved into the next thing. I talked earlier about it's like a hierarchy, but it's not a traditional hierarchy. Where a hierarchy, when the power is one way, it all comes down. You might notice these little arrows. This is called double linking, which is a really important process or part of sociocracy. So L here, I think that stands for operational leader. So this person has a role. They sit in the general circle as a member, and then they also sit in a task circle. And in a task circle, they're responsible for bringing the general circle's perspective into the task circle. So if the general circle, for example, creates a policy, it's the operational leader that sort of is responsible for bringing that policy and overseeing that policy in the task circle. So there's a power down in the traditional sense. At the same time, because of the spirit of iteration, the spirit of inclusion, the spirit of feedback loops, there's another role which is called the elected representative, which is D here, and they sit in the general circle and the task circle, but it's their responsibility to feed back into the general circle from the task circle.
I'm listening.
Not
So
creepy.
This is almost like splitting what would traditionally be a middle management role, where you're having pressure from the people above you to get things done, and then you're working with the staff on the ground who are finding all kinds of problems with what you're doing, and they're like, they're
Meeting the sandwich.
yeah, exactly, yeah,
I think it sounds quite like having a union rep.
yeah.
So they're there to carry your voice.
Yes, the operational leader. Sorry, the elected representative. Yeah, it's like, this is what we think you should do, or these are the boundaries and policies or boundaries and principles that we want you to work under. Okay, these are the boundaries and principles. They do the work. They come up with a plan, do the work. Having done the work, this worked, that didn't work. So they feed that back. This worked, that didn't work. Go on.
Are all those M's, can they join the general circle too? Or is it just the
I think you can make it up as you please. So they could, I think everyone could be in the general circle and task circles, but the roles would be in an ideal situation defined.
Yeah.
Okay.
How does this fit? Because we have a cooperative structure and there are certain legal things we have to do for that. So we have to have a general meeting and then everybody, well, you know, a certain amount of people have to go to that in order for it to be quorum,
Yeah.
blah, blah, blah. So I'm just, and actually it doesn't really fit with that in a sense that you can't elect someone to go for you and then each member has its own voice.
Yes. And yeah, so I mean that's in a way where the hierarchy comes in. So if it was a legal matter and in your legal structure,
Your rules.
everyone had to consent to something, then that would exist in a circle where everyone was present and everyone was consenting to it. It would be the circle would fit the level in which you're viewing on something. Does that make sense?
So if your process, if I was understanding, if your process said everyone had to be there, the circle would be everyone.
Yes.
Is it?
Which one of those would it be
It'd be
in the
another
general
one.
circle or
Could be a
separate?
separate
one?
circle, yeah.
Okay.
One way groups sometimes do this is to have a general meeting of everybody, which acts as an advisory body to these circles. So
Right.
you might vote on something and say to, say, the general circle, it's the wish of everybody that we do this. So that would be fed into that process. But you can devise a cooperative structure that works sociocratically
Yeah, I
too.
was trying to think because we won't have the kind of numbers that you do, so we might be able to make it work a little bit.
You might just have one circle. I mean, we had
Yeah.
one circle for
At the moment,
Yes.
it's just one big circle, yeah,
yeah.
and everybody's doing everything.
Well, one of the reasons for having task circles is if you find you've got too big a circle to get through business easily. First of all, delegating to task sub-circle or whatever can be more efficient than dealing with everything in a big meeting. It takes a long time to get around everybody. And secondly, if you do have those task circles, some of those people may not feel the need to be in the general circle. They'd be happy getting on with the particular task. And so that could reduce the number in the general circle.
So when we took people on last time, we introduced people initially to a task circle to get them light touch involved and to be a bit more interesting doing stuff. And after 6 months, we opened up the opportunity to join the general circle, and no one took the opportunity to join the general circle. They were happy in the task circles. So now we're revising how we do that going forward. It was worth saying as well that the circles are semi-autonomous, so the operational lead will deliver sort of the policy and parameters and the boundaries, and then within that task circle, for example, they get to work out what their aims are, they get to work out how they organise, they can operate with a degree of autonomy so long as they are operating within the boundaries and the principles and the parameters that have been set to that circle. So yeah, again, it's another way that it's not purely just top down, that you can
I'm a bit concerned about this term top circle. I know you might have the experts in that group. The experts shouldn't be the top. In fact, if anything, the experts are advisors to others who, you know, have requested their advice.
There's a lot of, I guess, terminology or labels that they feel like they're clunky, they don't quite fit the spirit of it, because it's, you know, top sounds like it's above in a power way, because that's how we're used to hearing it, whereas in this sense it's above in terms of perspective, like it's seeing a bigger picture. But some people don't use that structure, so they might flip it on its head so that it's like a tree structure, so the roots are actually the bottom, so that the people looking after the the biggest vision perspective are in the bottom, and then it goes up through the roots, through the trunk, to the branches, and the task circles are like the leaves that are collecting the sun.
Yeah.
I think
Well, the top circle, I think it came, it's sort of classic sociocracy, which came from an electronics company in the Netherlands, where it converted from a traditional structure to sociocracy, and the board of directors were the top circle, and had to have a board of directors for its company legal structure.
Sure.
And that might still be the case in co-housing or whatever. But new terms are being found, and I think mission circle is my favourite at the moment, because in a sense it's dealing with the most abstract level of your existence as an organisation, making sure you meet legal and financial regulations. But you're kind of, in a way, a task circle, as you suggested, just dealing with those issues. And by having the power of consent in the general circle, making sure the general circle follows those legal obligations. So, I wanted to talk a bit about meetings. One of the sort of tools of sociocracy is having a kind of generalised template for meeting structures, which incorporates some of the other principles we've talked about. Generally, sociocracy loves three-step processes: lead, do, measure, and so on. This is another one, which is quite a new way of talking about it, is understand, consider, and decide. And we did some of that earlier when we did the pet policy. We were understanding what the issues were, what the needs of the group are, and then getting ideas which we would consider and then eventually turn into a proposal, and then you would decide on the proposal, and then, if necessary, deal with objections. So this is a cheat sheet prepared by Sociocracy for All, who are based in America, and they're wonderful, I think. They're two people, basically, who live in a co-housing community in, I think it's Massachusetts or something, I've forgotten exactly.
they're on your list of resources as well. So
Yeah.
And they produce lots of materials like this, which are very helpful and are freely available. And this is a cheat sheet for going through meetings. It's just kind of a reminder that you could actually go through a meeting and follow this if you wanted. So the basic structure of a meeting is this first box up here. And it's divided into 4 parts. The opening check-in, bringing people into the circle. The administrative bits, which are things like announcements, consenting to minutes, and they always suggest confirming the next meeting time at the beginning in case anybody leaves early. It's just a sensible suggestion. And consenting to the agenda, so that people have been given the agenda in advance, hopefully, and you agree it in the meeting, and that's the opportunity for people to bring new things in, which you can then agree consent to being added, if there is time. Then you go through each item on the agenda one by one, and the second column is how you deal with each item. So there are different things that you can do depending on what stage you're at. If you're trying to form a proposal, you'd start with picture forming. What's the issue? What are the dimensions? Is that list of dimensions complete? And that's the sort of considerations bit that we did with the PETS policy. And then proposal shaping, which would start with generating ideas of how you might meet those issues. And then you would organise the ideas, like bunch them together if they're closely related, and work them up into a proposal. If it's a fairly straightforward sort of thing, you'd be able to do that in the meeting. If it's more complex, you might stop that there
and send some people away to do it outside the meeting, to actually write up a proposal with this list of ideas, which you would do with a pet policy. And then you'd bring it back and you'd get consent for that proposal covering all the issues that you've listed at the beginning. And then once you've got your proposal consented to, you work through it. You present the proposal, and you have your rounds of clarifying questions. Do people understand it? Quick reaction round. What do you feel about it? Have you got any sudden thoughts about it? And then check for consent. If you have objections to consent at that point, you go into the third column. And first of all, you just try and understand what's the objection. Is it really an objection in the Sociocratic sense that you can't do the work of the circle because of this issue? Like you suddenly discover that the co-op's toilet paper is not actually recycled. Not 100% recycled, but you thought it was because it said recycled on the front. So is that an objection that stops you buying it there? Or it could be like the co-op suddenly gets involved in something that you really disapprove of in its supply chain, and that might say, well, that's against our cooperative ethic, so we're going to Infinity Foods from now on. But you'd also be checking to see if it's a preference. Like if somebody says, I don't like this toilet paper, it's too hard, you have to find a way of dealing with that, and they might say, well, look, we bought a year's supply.
That's a room full of this. Bring your own.
Bring your own. That would be a creative solution. And if necessary, people could be reimbursed if they objected to that sort of thing. You understand what the real problem is with the preference, and amend the proposal as necessary. Now it might be that you actually revise the content of the proposal to say something different, like you exclude the co-op from your policy, and you say Infinity Foods or some other workers' cooperative, because the co-op's a different kind of cooperative. Or you may change the term, like with the pet policy, if you find a year's too long, there's too much going on, you need to revise it more quickly than that, change the term of the policy. And make sure that you're measuring the concern in some way. And it's like I said about getting proposals done. If necessary, you might refer this job of dealing with the objections to a more focused group who've got the time to look at it in detail, or perhaps bring in an expert to work out how ethical is the cooperative movement, or the cooperative society. Or a broader circle, so that's where you might go to the general circle, Heidi, you were talking about. You say, sorry, not a general circle, but the whole circle. We as a general circle can't decide this at the moment. We'd be making decisions that other people may not like. We need to take it to the whole group of people and get their advice on this, and then bring it back to the general circle to form a new proposal. Or you might get what's called a helping circle, which is just a group of people, which may include people, say, outside the co-housing project, who are just there to help you work out how to deal with the objections. So that might include a mediator, say, if you've got interpersonal issues. Or it might be just one person. You just say, look, we've got this objection. It might be the person who brought the proposal. We've got this objection. Go away, rethink it, bring it back next time. So you do this for each item on the agenda. and it's the kind of the nesting principle of sociocracy, that you kind of look at things in a broad sense, and then you focus in on detail, and that comes from the sort of logical cybernetic aspect of sociocracy.
Which was its roots. It was developed by engineers. We don't think we mentioned that at the beginning.
Yeah, there's various people, but there's a chap called Endenburg in the Netherlands who was running an electronics firm, and he got some of the sort of humanity ideas from the way Quaker meetings are run, but he, being in electronics, was interested in the logical systems of feedback loops and nesting, which is a way of doing programming, for example. And if you're stuck at any point, do a round to see if anybody's got any ideas of how to get out of it. Rounds can be very helpful. Yes?
I've seen that in since working with the trust, and in board meetings, for example, and where there's been lots of comments, and then Julian said, okay, what should we do? And it really, and I guess it could probably take the heat out of two people, you know, who have got two ideas and what have you, and it brings everybody back in again. It's been fascinating to watch.
Oh, good.
Yes, yeah, it seemed like a real tool.
Yeah.
Could I just ask who would suggest doing that round? You know, would it be the moderator or anybody in the circle to say, come on, we're not getting on, we're not getting on
We
here.
haven't
Let's
talked
try
about
around.
who leads
Who would do it?
facilitates.
Yeah, who would do that?
Well, you'd have a facilitator who's leading rounds,
Okay.
but the facilitator's not like the boss of the
No,
circle.
no.
The facilitator is looking for ideas.
Yeah.
So if someone came up with the idea, look, this is taking too long, can we send it to another group outside to
I
come
see.
back next meeting? Then you check for consent for that and do that.
And then I'll go back to the facilitator, so
Yeah.
they're going to do that and they go on.
Yeah.
And meetings generally, they have a facilitator for the whole meeting, and then some people might be ascribed facilitation responsibility for a particular item within that overall meeting. So, you know, so Julia might be the facilitator for the day, and he's overseeing it all. But when it comes to item 3A, CAPU, that I've been responsible for tuning up a proposal to bring back, then I will facilitate that process. And then, as well, like other meetings, there's, sorry, you might be saying this, but like, say a secretary role or a bookkeeper, so someone take the minutes, you might allocate someone timekeeper responsibility, so that the sort of responsibility is shared around.
What happens if you've got 2 hours for a meeting and 5 things, and the first thing takes a long time? Or do you have a time limit, but what happens if you need longer for that item, or
What happens if
you need longer for one item, or if or if people feel that you're cutting it short because you haven't allowed enough time?
you have to play it by ear? I mean, facilitation is an art, and I think in some ways it's the most fundamental art for sociocracy. I think understanding sociocratic processes is also, it's really good if you can get everybody trained, and we haven't got everybody trained yet, so we're not all doing it just like that. But I think being sensitive and being able to pick up what people are saying, noticing if people are hesitating, and being able to make useful suggestions, like this is taking too long, can we park it till next time, or can we send somebody away to deal with it outside, or can we drop the rest of the agenda and carry on with this? You know, we were doing that all the time. Yeah.
Part of our agendas include next meetings, so arranging the time and the date or confirming that, and also trying to work up what the agenda might be. So we might have things on our agenda that we didn't get through this time, so they get put onto future agendas to be brought back. Yeah, there's never enough time. Sociocracy doesn't mean that you get everything done, but it is a way of adding some structure to the attempt to get things done.
in meetings, I'm just wondering if you use other tools.
Yeah.
So I've noticed in the board that we don't particularly have, but that might just be because it's just been those meetings. But sometimes where somebody's got, dots and a thing, or you can get all the other kind of meeting facilitation tools to kind of get ideas, or do you really just stick with the kind of going around there?
No, you can use any meeting tools you want. I mean, I suppose in the board it's because I'm not that experienced at using a wide range of tools, but anybody can suggest something that we use. When you come to dealing with an item on the agenda, it's great if you can plan in advance what the aim of that item is, what the outcome is from dealing with that item, and what sort of method you'll use. So you might use rounds as a method, or you might use voting or dots on a board or whatever. And it's like when you're doing rounds, you might come to a point where you change the method to pop up, as Rich said, whatever works really. But it's really good to have the method, the aims in advance, so that you know what you're trying to achieve, and a method which is consented to by people. Yeah.
Oh, thanks.
So who decides who's facilitating? Well, how does that, because I assume it rotates in some way, but how do you decide?
Not necessarily. You could, you have to decide by consent, and it's one of the role elections, or it can be one of the role elections that you do in Sociocracy, which if you were trying to decide for, say, a facilitator for the next 6 months in the meeting, you might well have a proper election, which involves people going around saying who they think is the best person for the job and why. And you go around a few times until you usually narrow in on somebody. But it's a really good process because you hear, I think Rich would be really good at this because he can do this, that and the other. And you might say, you'd be better at this because you have years of experience in facilitating a group. And as you go around a few times, you tend to narrow in on somebody. And a person facilitating can make a decision, actually, a reasoned decision out of what they've heard. But the important thing is you've considered the positive aspects of people who are eligible for it.
And each circle would do that themselves?
Yes, each circle does it themselves. And they do it for different roles, like they're elected representative in the general circle, or the general circle elects the person to go to the site and design circle and to lead policy on that. Yeah.
I feel like that might be one more question, and then we'll do.
This is a difficult one, but this process is very positive thinking orientated, and occasionally, hopefully rarely, you'll get to a point where there's a sticking point, and some consensus model that's sometimes referred to as a block. And I'm wondering, I can understand how mediation might slot in, but is there also support resources around people who are in a collective? There's an exit policy development. Is there some consideration where sometimes, like very occasionally, you get people who are fundamentally opposed to each other's ideas and decisions together.
I guess in the first instance it comes back to the vision and the mission and the principles and the aims. So the group that's come together has been founded upon those sort of guiding documents, or those guiding top level things, and they are what we come back to. It hasn't happened that dramatically yet. We have had friction and tension in the group, and stopping the business of the work and looking at some of the softer aspects of that. So, trying to employ non-violent communication in how you hear each other and understand each other, where you're coming from, seems to allow us to move on through that and resolve something. We're just about to, or we're in the process of organising some training in restorative circles. So if NVC interpersonally doesn't work, then the next level of our sort of conflict resolution would be restorative circles. So that would be another process, and part of that might be bringing in someone else to mediate. But yeah, ultimately, I think what is best for the project, or what serves the project's aims and vision, is the backstop to any sort of disagreements and the principles by which we're going about getting the work done. And it might mean that someone isn't abiding by the principles, and their objection doesn't relate to the vision and the mission or the aims. Therefore, it's not a reasoned and paramount objection. It's just a preference.
And there are a few other options that groups have. You can. You should really have a way of removing people from a group if they are too disruptive, and that would be like an election process. But we haven't gone into that, but I've heard of groups doing it.
Yeah.
You can have a rule like if someone is blocking something, they have to come up with an alternative proposal. Some groups do that.
It's a good practical way, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
And another one is if consent process fails, you could revert as a backstop to one person, one vote, and actually vote on things if necessary. And I think quite a few groups have found that as a useful reassurance and not had to use it, or not very often. But it's good to have that as a backstop.
So, hopefully, that has either whet your appetite or repulsed you so as to know whether you might want to go towards this or something like this in your groups, or steer clear and not get involved in any of this sort of organising yourselves or structured decision making. I think all that's left really now to say is that you've got a bunch of handouts that includes a resource list, so places to find additional info. I think all the slides and things will be emailed to you perhaps, as well.
Thank you.
And I think this will be made into a video that will be available online as well, so you can refresh it or share it around to other people in the group if you're trying to convince them of it. We, as Sociocracy Co-housing, tend to do a Sociocracy training every year and a half or something like that, I think. There is some possibility of a group being set up to facilitate more training and networking for other co-housing groups. I know that's in discussion, so that might be, Sociocracy might be something, for example, that other groups want more training in, so there might be more training available. There's a great resource online.
Yes, you could set up yourself using resources online.
Yeah.
I think it's the sort of thing that the whole membership would need to do. Like, I can't really go to my meeting tomorrow and go, this is what it's all about, because I have no real clue. But it needs they need to experience it themselves in order to consent to it.
There's videos they can see online, there's little exercises and you can do using resources online, and you can get a mentor from America to do stuff with you online.
Okay.
And I think the general strategy for introducing Sociocracy to an organisation that exists and isn't using Sociocracy is to have a sort of helping circle set up to research it and introduce it bit by bit as you can.
So you might find that if your group or in work or in your family, you've got to make a decision on something, or you want to come up with an idea for something, you might find that I've done it in other realms apart from co-housing, where a proposal forming exercise where you agree an aim, collect the considerations, collect the ideas. It's a really nice process that you can sort of use in isolation in a way, and it's not bringing the weight of Sociocracy to something, but it's giving people a taster for rounds, for inclusion.
Yeah. If nothing else, do rounds.
Yeah, the rounds thing.
Yeah.
And the consent over consensus, I think, is really fundamental.
Yeah.
Because, consensus is so problematic.
And within that consent, like, can I live with this for now? It has the
a way for it to change as
yes,
well.
exactly. The
It's
now
not rigid.
gives it a time frame with which
Because human beings generally rigid, they tend to change,
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
even within a few hours.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think, I don't know if you mentioned, it came up a few times, I wanted to labour the point, but we talk about humanising of efficiency. So in rounds, sometimes once the clarifying questions have been had, then the round of initial reactions or gut reactions can, I like it because it allows you to just to be irrational or to be just physical or like, before you have to make a reasonable, rational, logical point, you can just like, bleh,
Yeah.
bleh, because in my experience, you might have like a, bleh, but when it's your time to talk, you have to, it's not enough to just say, bleh.
Yeah.
So you have to come up with a logical, rational thing that is fueled by bleh.
Yeah.
So your rational, logical thing might be mixed messages. Whereas if you had a space for bleh, knowing that it's going to come back again and you can be more rational, more reasonable. Again, it broadens out what you can bring to things, which in broadening out and getting out the breadth of what people are bringing means that things aren't in the shadows sort of influencing and impacting on things that you're doing out of awareness. So, okay, that's all we've got time for.
Thank you.
Great.